Okay, so after Little Rock Nine and the Montgomery bus boycott, a lot of the nation and world's attention is on the civil rights movement a lot more. So we're going to see a lot of this sort of making it into the spotlight, and a lot of people not just becoming sort of celebrities in the movement, but celebrities overall. So we'll start with this guy on the left, James Meredith. So James Meredith was an Air Force veteran, and he had sort of teamed up with another civil rights activist who we'll talk about later on, named Medgar Evers. But Medgar Evers was in the NAACP, and he helped James Meredith to enroll at the University of Mississippi at Ole Miss. And Ole Miss in 1963, I think. And actually, it might have been 1959. I think that's actually right. 1959. Obviously, years aren't that important to me. So, but back then, Ole Miss was an all-white school. And when he enrolled, it was very low-key. They had agreed to let him come. It wasn't that big of a deal. But once word got out that James Meredith was going to be attending Ole Miss, all hell broke loose. And so on the day that he was set to arrive at Ole Miss, white protesters started a riot outside of the college, and he had to be escorted by U.S. Marshals. You see, that's the bottom picture. He had to be escorted by U.S. Marshals into school. Overall, in that riot outside Ole Miss, 160 people got injured, and 2 people actually got killed in that riot. So ultimately, this is making national news. You see him there holding a newspaper of the headline is that he's about to enroll at school, and but ultimately Ole Miss did let him come, and things calmed down, but he had to have guards with him all the time, and he was able to register his classes, and he did graduate from Ole Miss in 1963. And after he went to Ole Miss, he actually went to Columbia University and got his law degree, and he's going to be a major player in the NAACP and the civil rights movement going forward. Now we can talk about Dr. King. So Martin Luther King, remember I've told you up until this point, was fairly well known in the movement. He was very outspoken and supportive of the Montgomery bus boycott, and he had already founded the SCLC with Ralph Abernathy by this time. So he was setting out to get bigger and bigger things accomplished. Now Birmingham, Alabama, had the reputation for being the most segregated city in the South. So Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and the SCLC started a series of sit-ins and nonviolent protests in Birmingham, trying to prompt the city to get a court order prohibiting to get more demonstrations. He's sort of like pushing them to legally stop him from doing this, and that's exactly what happens, because he's basically trying to get himself arrested, because then that'll help him gain national attention. That's exactly what happens. Birmingham gets a court order saying that he can't protest the next day, because the next day is a holiday. Good Friday is the next day. And so it's, Good Friday 1963, he has this court order saying he's not allowed to protest, and he does it anyway. He stages the protest and joins in with the protest himself that Good Friday, and gets himself arrested and sent to jail. While he's in jail, this is when he writes his famous Letter from a Birmingham Jail, which is like one of the most famous pieces of civil rights writing ever. And in that letter, he basically explained why the black community is tired of waiting for equality and for reform, about how this has really been a long time coming. It's a really inspirational piece of writing. You've probably read or heard pieces of it before. So when he was released several days later, the SCLC upped the protests, and this time they allowed children to participate. Now, Birmingham had a public safety officer. It's almost like a chief of police, and his name is Bull Connor. His name is Bull Connor. I've got it right here on the slide towards the right. That's Bull Connor. So Bull Connor ordered police dogs and fire hoses be used on the protesters. There are children out there, okay? So photographs like this start being taken and circulating all over the country. As you can see, these are protesters being hit with fire hoses. Fire hoses have such a powerful I guess you would say, like, impact that it can draw blood. Like, it can cut your skin open if you're hit with a fire hose. So these pictures are just really awful. You see this guy's, like, throwing himself in front of this woman to protect her from the fire hoses. So these videos and photographs start circulating around the country, and thousands of Americans actually start writing letters to Kennedy and asking him to step in. So on June 11th of 1963, JFK gives a televised national address. So that's what this photograph is from. And so he gets on TV and he calls the civil rights movement a moral issue. And he says that the government needs to fulfill its promise of giving all Americans equal rights and representation. So basically what he's saying here is that he not only will support the law, but he supports the civil rights movement, and that he believes that you can't not support it and still be morally right. He says that this is a moral issue, which it obviously is. So he also proposes a new Civil Rights Act that is going to be sort of headed up by his brother, his Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. Robert Kennedy is going to be the one leading the crusade to get this new Civil Rights Act passed. So in an effort to gain support for this new Civil Rights Act and to show the unity of the civil rights movement, A. Philip Randolph, who you remember from the Double V campaign and the civil rights movement during World War II, along with Bayard Rustin, who is another civil rights leader in the NAACP, they started to plan a march on Washington. It was going to be called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, was the whole name of it, but we just call it the March on Washington. And a lot of people attribute Dr. King with a lot of this because he was one of the people involved in helping to organize the whole thing. So the NAACP, the SCLC, SNCC, CORE, and other religious and labor unions all worked together to plan this March on Washington. The Jewish Anti-Defamation League was involved. There was a lot. This is a very, very diverse civil rights group here that was working on organizing all of this. So the march took place on on August 28th of 1963, and over 200,000 people arrived. They had not expected it to get that big, and to have a rally or march that big, it's very stressful, because the more people, the more likely that there will be fights, tension, possibly a riot, that some of this could turn into violence. But regardless of how big this event was, it was still completely peaceful. It was really festive. It was a lot like a party, and everybody was in really high spirits the whole time. A lot of celebrities and other entertainers were there to perform, like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, who I've got here on the right, both really popular musicians during the time. And they sang and performed, as well as many different civil rights leaders gave speeches, one of them, of course, being Dr. King. And this is where he stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial and gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. Now, fun fact, the I Have a Dream part was actually ad-libbed. He wasn't going to say that part until Fannie Lou Hamer, who is another civil rights activist, and we'll talk about her in just a minute. But Fannie Lou called out to him while he was giving his speech there in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and she said, "Tell them about your dream, Martin." And that's when he just started talking, and that part became so absolutely famous. So there, of course, had been some tension in the planning stages. When you've got that many, cooks in the kitchen, things can get crazy. But regardless, this pretty much for the most part shows how beautiful this entire movement can be, and that you can see all of these different organizations working together towards a positive outcome and goal. And the whole thing just goes absolutely wonderfully, and it really takes King's celebrity and influence to a whole new level. So that civil rights bill that Kennedy had proposed that the march was meant to support is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So let's rewind a little to September 15th of 1963. A bomb exploded the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. Now, Birmingham had, as I told you, had that reputation of being the most segregated city in the South. All those protests had gone on with, like, Bull Connor, turning fire hoses onto children and things like that. Birmingham had actually gotten the nickname Bombingham because it had gotten so violent and many bombs had been set off in the city. And that church, the 16th Street Baptist Church, had been the SCLC's headquarters during those Birmingham protests. And earlier in the summer of 1963. And so someone set a bomb off there. And when that happened, 4 little black girls were killed in the explosion. I've got their photograph here on the left. So this was in September of 1963. 2 months later, on November 22nd of 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. So both of these two really violent things back to back like this has everyone really shaken. Not that they have to do with each other, or not that Kennedy was killed because of his support for civil rights. I'm not saying that he wasn't, but we'll talk about Kennedy's assassination later on. But these two things happen, and our new president, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was sworn in, just a few hours after Kennedy was shot, LBJ uses his position, JFK's death, and the death of these 4 little girls to sort of guilt people and, push this Civil Rights Act through Congress. Now, a lot of people were shocked that he had been so supportive of it because LBJ is from Texas. He's from the South, and a lot of people thought that he might have been more critical of the civil rights movement, or at least neutral, but he was actually relatively supportive of it here in the beginning. So there was actually an 80-day filibuster trying to stop the bill from being voted on, but they managed to get a vote to stop the filibuster, and then the bill was able to pass the Senate, and then it made it to LBJ's desk, and he signed it into law in July of 1964. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 bans segregation in all public places and gives the federal government the power to enforce integration of public schools. So now not only is it up to the states, but the federal government can actually carry out all of that. It also gives federal courts the power to prosecute people for violating civil rights, and it also outlaws employment based on race, color, sex, or national origin. So that's sort of like I guess you could say a more serious and stricter law to help out Executive Order 8802. And then the last thing that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does is it forms the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is basically designed to make sure that people are being employed not based on race, color, sex, or national origin. All right, last little bit here. So many communities in the South were still using Reconstruction era tactics to prevent Black people from voting. And that's going to be the next sort of campaign happening here in the Civil Rights Movement. Segregation has been, completely wiped out with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So voting and representation of African Americans in politics and in government is going to be sort of the next step. So in Mississippi in 1964, not one Black person had registered to vote in 5 counties, and all 5 of those counties had actually a Black majority. So clearly something wrong is happening here. So SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had been working on their Mississippi campaign for quite some time, and now they wanted to stage a new effort to get more Black people to vote because their campaign wasn't really doing a whole lot, so they wanted to sort of start something new. So in 1964, SNCC launched a new campaign called the Freedom Summer. And this was a massive movement through the summer of 1964 to register as many Black people to vote as possible. Over 1,000 volunteers came to Mississippi that summer, Black and white alike. Most of them were students, as I've said, because SNCC is largely a student-led organization, but they're from all over the country. People from the South, people from the North, out West, all over the place. People are coming, flooding to Mississippi to help Black people register to vote. So out of all of this, so many of these people are coming that a new political party formed called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Now, the reason why they formed the MFDP is because the Democratic Party in Mississippi was pretty much all white and pretty much all racist. And if all these African Americans who are registering to vote, if any of them would like to vote as a registered Democrat, there's not really any representation for them there. They're not going to be taken seriously. And you shouldn't have to only register for the Republican Party. If you believe with other Democratic ideas, you should be able to join that party and feel welcome to join that party. So they sort of found the MFDP as like a third party with the beliefs of the Democratic Party, but without the racism. So this Freedom Summer gains national attention, unfortunately, when 3 volunteers, Michael Schwerner, who is right here, James Chaney here in the middle, and then Andrew Goodman here, right here, they all disappeared, and they had all come from the north to Mississippi as part of this Freedom Summer to register Black people to vote.